Your Royal Highness, Your Excellency, Chief Minister, esteemed guests, Durrell members, and friends of Durrell, welcome to the Durrell Lecture 2025. It's really wonderful to see so many of you here today in the newly refurbished Jersey Opera House. And a little fact for you all, a little fun fact, when they replaced the ropes used for the rigging, the old ropes were kindly donated to Jersey Zoo, and our wonderful family of gorillas and orangutans are now enjoying them. So thank you very much. Yeah, I think it does deserve a round of applause. While the Durrell Lecture is an annual event in our calendars, much anticipated by Durrell supporters, tonight is particularly special as it marks the end of a year of celebrations. We're here tonight to celebrate the legacy of Gerald Durrell, but also the impact of the global charity he founded. And now we're going to watch a short film.
In a great, endless universe where life is so rare,
we're surrounded and protected by a layer of air.
On a planet of wonder, made of oceans
and lands,
whose future rests in all of our hands.
Its surface is covered in wonderful things
that walk and talk and think and swing. With lizards and plants and fishes and birds. And insects and mammals
that travel in herds.
It's a land full of trees that reach for the sky.
With birds, bats and bugs flap their wings and fly.
Where armies of ants form nice tidy lines
as they march across forests
and fungus and vines. Where colourful creatures of all shapes and sizes
live out their lives
as the sun sets and rises.
Some sleep in the day and come out at night,
while others prefer to play when it's light.
Where raindrops make rivers that flow to the sea,
so that creatures of all colours can roam far and free.
Where web-footed critters paddle and play,
as wave after wave rise and fall every day.
In an endless universe where life is so rare, there's a precious planet we wild things share. It's a place of wonder filled with colourful lands, and its future health rests in our powerful hands.
So the short film we just watched was first shown at the Royal Institution in London in November 2017, when we officially launched our Rewild Our World strategy in the presence of our patron, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, who we are delighted to have again with us this evening. This bold and ambitious strategy has been a step change for Durrell. While our four-word mission statement, Saving Species from Extinction, remains unchanged, our Rewild Our World strategy recognised that saving species was more than breeding and releasing endangered species. We need to protect and restore their habitats, use species to drive broader ecosystem conservation, and work closely with people. We all depend on nature. We are all a part of nature, and this strategy sought to better connect us to nature, to inspire us all to take action to save our wonderful planet. Rewild Our World laid out 4 ambitious goals, with 2025 chosen as the end of the strategy, so it tied in with the year Gerald Durrell would have been 100. And that brings us to why we are here tonight, and we have a truly inspirational evening lined up for you all. Firstly, we'll welcome to the stage our Honorary Director, Dr. Lee Durrell, who will be joined by Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, a multi-award-winning writer and broadcaster, renowned for his commitment to sustainable, ethical food and environmental causes. He's really passionate about the connection between food, farming and conservation, and his love of nature was ignited by reading Jerry's books. Tonight, Lee and Hugh will discuss Jerry's extraordinary vision, why it is still relevant today, and how his pioneering approach will continue to guide us for the next 100 years. After that, we'll take a look into some of the stories of change from our Rewild Our World strategy. Dr. Mike Hudson, our Director of Conservation Knowledge, which brings together science, training, and impact, will bring to life the meaningful impact Durrell has had on species, landscapes, and people over the last 8 years. But now I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Lee Durrell and Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall.
Good evening. Thank you so much for welcoming me to Jersey and for giving me this extraordinary opportunity to spend a little bit of time with the inspirational Lee Durrell to talk not only about the amazing Jerry Durrell and his work and his legacy, but a little bit about the future hopes and aspirations of all the extraordinary Durrell activities around the world, and to hear a little bit, a lot I hope, from Lee about how she sees the future. Just a short moment on my possible, arguable credentials for being here this evening. They do very much sit with the time I spent with Gerald Durrell's books as a young lad. But we all have our transforming moments, I think, when it comes to learning to love nature and also wanting to do something with or about our love for nature. And it happened to me when I was about 5 years old, when my mum and dad moved out of London and rented a farmhouse in Gloucestershire, and my world changed completely. Perhaps not quite as dramatically or emphatically as Jerry's world changed when he moved to Corfu in 1945, but nevertheless it was an eye-opening experience for me, and I suddenly changed from being perhaps on the point of being an urban urchin to being a nature boy, and I ran wild in the hedgerows of Gloucestershire and collected snails and looked into birds' nests and spent every moment I could outside. One thing I dreamed about, like many small boys who were excited by nature, was capturing something from the wild and making a pet of it. As you can imagine, these stories don't very often end well. What happened eventually to help me momentarily have sight of this ambition was when we were on a picnic and we saw 1 or 2 lizards scuttling around in the dry grass. And my dad managed to catch one to show me close up. And I begged him and entreated him to let us take it home in one of the Tupperware boxes that we'd had our picnic in, so that I could keep it and possibly start a colony of lizards in our own garden. Wasn't going to be a super successful plan given that we only had one of them, but you never know. The real tragedy occurred when I decided to take the lizard to school later the following week to show my friends in the classroom. And I put it in a biscuit tin with some holes punched in the lid with a handful of grass to keep it happy, as I thought it might. And of course the lizard got out and scuttled around and everyone ran after it, and it was all really quite stressful, and I wanted to get it back in the biscuit tin as quickly as possible. And in my hurry to put the lid on the tin, I didn't entirely notice that the lizard was actually not quite inside, but half in and half out. And when I did notice, it wasn't quite 2 lizards, but it wasn't in the shape it had been in when it arrived. And it was a salutary lesson that the best way to enjoy nature is in the wild. And I'm afraid within a day or so, that lizard was no more. So it was a hard one. But I think it's also a lesson that whenever we interact with nature, there will be great moments of inspiration and hope, but there will also be moments of reality and difficulty and emotional trauma. And that's that's always going to be the case. And I think Jerry faced that head on throughout his life, and he never gave up hope, and he went on doing everything he could to ensure that we could all enjoy the extraordinary creatures of the natural world. And Lee, I'd like to start by asking you, it was only a couple of years after the lizard incident that I discovered Jerry's amazing books, and I think that certainly was an amazing escape for me, and another level of thinking and understanding about nature. But for Gerald, where do you think it started? Did it come from within? Obviously, there was the move to Corfu, and for him, no doubt, also this extraordinary explosion of nature all around him. But was there also a mentor or a guide or a book that set him on his path, just as his books did for me?
I think probably you'll all agree with me. A lot of people seem to be simply born with an empathy for animals and for nature. And I think that was definitely true of Jerry. You know, he was born in India, and he had very good recall. And he does recall when he left India when he was 2. But before that, he remembers walking with his ayah, you know, his nurse, down the road and seeing 2 slugs. And I think they were mating, actually, the way he described it. He didn't realize that at the time. But he just thought they were the most beautiful things that he had ever seen. And he wrote about that in a book that he and I did together called The Amateur Naturalist. So that was his very first memory. But then he left India at age 2. They went to Bournemouth, went to London first, then to Bournemouth. And he vividly recalls the little kindergarten where he was, and his wonderful teacher called Miss Squig. And Miss Squig indulged him in looking for creepy crawlies and things in the garden at the school. And I think that was a very important person. And by the way, Miss Squig appeared on, you know, Jerry was on This Is Your Life in 1983. I don't know if any of you saw that. And Miss Squig, the kindergarten teacher, we found her, and she came onto that program. So that was great. And but then as the story goes, he then went on to Corfu when he was age 10, and that was really where his love of nature and wildlife really blossomed. He often described it as being like in The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy stepped out of black and white Kansas and stepped out of the basket in Oz, and suddenly Technicolor appeared on the screen. And he said that was what Corfu was like for him.
I think they used that trick in the BBC series, didn't they? Filming the early scenes in black and white, and
yes,
and then with the arrival in Corfu, the whole filmic life burst into colour.
Certainly,
so obviously picking up from his own metaphor. He had a series of of slightly reluctantly engaged with tutors. He did his best to avoid any form of teaching at all, I think, for the first year or 2, as I recall. But initially it was, the stay was intended to perhaps just be 6 months, and then they decided they were going to stick around.
And they ended up staying for about 4.5 years, I think, yeah. But the tutors, it was quite, you're right, he was a very reluctant pupil. But he would only learn anything if it had anything to do with animals. So a mathematics problem had to be described as if there are 3 caterpillars can eat 10 leaves in a week, how long would it take 6 caterpillars to eat leaves? I can't work that out, but I just made it up. But that would be the only way that would get Jerry to be, and he was so interested in geography, but where the animals came from, and Hannibal taking the elephants over the Alps. And
you could do a little bit of history, as long as it involves elephants climbing over mountain skates, and presumably mathematics involved millipedes and centipedes instead of an abacus or a ruler.
Quite, absolutely. But he was very fortunate. His mentor really was the most wonderful polymath, a man called Dr. Theodore Stephanides, who was a scientist, a doctor, a medical doctor, a poet, and he lived in Corfu and was a close friend of the family, close friend of Lawrence Durrell as well as the whole family. And Jerry learned all sorts of things from Theodore, like his doggerel verse and funny poems and rude poems and things like that. But Theodore passed away, and I was lucky enough to meet him actually. But Theodore passed away in 1983, and Jerry wrote the tribute to him. And I showed that to you, and I thought you might like to. Would you like to read it, or shall I read it?
I think you should read it, Lee.
right.
I'd love you to read it for us. That
All
would be
right.
great.
So this was Jerry's tribute to Theodore. It just shows you what an extraordinary person this was. And this book, by the way, I'm not touting the book, I promise you.
No, you are, and you should.
This was, I compiled this for this centenary year, and it's just a lot of Jerry's best loved works, and some unpublished works as well. This is unpublished. And the Princess Royal wrote an introduction for it. Thank you very much, ma'am. Anyway, it's been doing well this year, and I've been sort of all over the place talking about it. But in here is Jerry's tribute to Theodore. And it goes, I've known Theodore for over 40 years. When I was 10 years old, he strolled into my life, tweed-suited, trilby-hatted, his walking stick with its tiny net on the end, his bag of tubes and bottles slung on his hip, his beard twinkling in the sun as a sort of walking hirsute encyclopedia. The effect of Theodore's erudition on a budding naturalist was enormous. To me, just starting to explore and learn about the world I lived in, to have Theodore as a guide, philosopher, and friend was one of the most important things that happened to me in my life. Not many young naturalists have the privilege of having their footsteps guided by a sort of omnipotent, benign, and humorous Greek god. Theodore had all the very best qualities of the early Victorian naturalist, an insatiable interest in the world he inhabited, and the ability to illuminate any topic with his observations and thoughts. His wide interests are, I think, summed up by the fact that in this day and age, he was a man who had a microscopic water crustacean named after him, as well as a crater on the moon. I can only sum up my feeling for him by saying that if I had the power of magic, I would confer two gifts on every child: the enchanted childhood that I had on the island of Corfu, and to be guided and befriended by Theodore Stephanides.
Well, that's a wonderful tribute.
Thank you. So, thank you.
And in a sense, Jerry himself took up that challenge to reach those children that obviously they couldn't all have such an incredible guide as Theodore or the experience of Corfu. But he has made all of that available to everybody who's happy to pick up his amazing books and read. And that's a quite extraordinary gift to the world. As I was saying earlier, I know how much that meant to me. How did you first become aware of Jerry and his work, and then how did you go on to meet?
Oh, no, that's a tale in itself. First aware, I was studying zoology, not surprisingly, at my American university, Duke University, and went off to Madagascar for 2 years to do my research on animal vocalizations. Anyway, was living with some missionaries, and there was a mission library, and that's where I checked out my first Gerald Durrell books. And I remember so well reading Jerry's books by the light of a paraffin lamp, and I had a little pet fruit bat with me at the time, and my fruit bat would snuggle up to me, and I'd be reading Jerry's books. It was a wonderful thing. Anyway, finished my studies, got back to my university, was writing up my dissertation, and my prof said, "Oh, have you ever heard of a British writer called Gerald Durrell?" And I said, "Heard of him? I read his books in the missions library, and he's my hero." And they said, "Well, he's coming through on a lecture tour. Would you like to come to dinner with him and some other professors?" And I said, "Yes, of course, obviously." And we were having drinks before dinner at the professor's house. And I remember sitting on a little sort of low thing like this, and there was an archway coming into the drawing room. And this man appeared in the archway in a powder blue suit, flowing white hair. And you could just feel the electricity as he came into the room, 10,000 watts, such was his charisma. And that was my first vision of Jerry, shall I say. And he and I, we actually kind of hit it off. He asked if he could drive with me to where we were going to dinner. My old little common gear car was full of dog hair and dead leaves. And anyway, we just talked, and it all really started from that. But they say, you should never meet your heroes. You never meet your heroes, much less marry them. So,
If you're going to meet them, perhaps you might as well crack on and marry them.
maybe I should.
But it was a little while between then and when you first came to Jersey. But when you came here for the first time, Jersey Zoo and the Jersey Nature Preservation Trust, as it was then called, was already up and running. What was? How did you? Presumably he invited you to Jersey. What were your expectations, and were they met, or was it all? How did it pan out when you got here?
It didn't match my expectations. He invited me over to Jersey very shortly after that first meeting. He said he wanted to set up a sound recording laboratory, and I'd been studying animal sounds, and he asked me to come and advise. I said, "Oh yes, God, I'd love to do that." So I arrived in Jersey, but I somehow had the idea that the whole of the island was devoted to Durrell Zoo. So I was really surprised arriving at the airport, not seeing vast herds and fields of animals other than Jersey cows. Anyway, he met me at the airport, and he took me through our grand front gates with a bottle of champagne, and I thought, this is really interesting welcome for a young scientist. And it became pretty clear that it wasn't to advise on his sound recording laboratory, was what he was up to.
I just want to get some clarity on that. Was the sound recording laboratory a complete red herring, or had he at least bought a couple of microphones and a tape recorder and put them in one of the rooms at the zoo? Did any materials appear that might have
did anything ever come of this?
Yeah.
No, I brought my own tape recorder over.
Okay. And obviously you've got to know Jersey very well, but how long was it before, how did the process of coming to understand what it really was about here, what Jerry was trying to do, and whether there was a sense that it really might succeed? Because obviously it's not just about what happens here in Jersey, is it? It's about what happens all over the world, and that's been the guiding light. And I had a wonderful tour of the zoo this morning, and every single animal that we looked at, every single enclosure we went to, I was hearing a story about. This connects with the work that our field teams are doing in Madagascar, in Brazil, in Indonesia, or wherever it in the world might be. Was that part of the operation there from the beginning? How did you sense the vision unfolding for him?
Well, by the time I came on board, it had certainly unfolded. But Jerry had this vision from a long, long time ago, from the time he started his own little zoo in Corfu, as we know, and then he did animal collecting expeditions, and this was to sell animals to zoos. But this was in the 40s and the 50s. That's how zoos used to acquire their animals. But he saw that what was happening to them when they came back to these zoos, which were hardly more than menageries in those days, that the animals were not well taken care of because nobody knew anything about them. But what really turned him against most zoos of those days was that they would say to him, well, don't worry that these animals have died, because there are plenty more where they came from. And that was simply not the case, that he was more. So he vowed to have his own zoo. But very early on, let me read you one thing, Hugh. I know we didn't talk about this. This was a letter he wrote to his brother, who became the famous writer Lawrence Durrell. And Jerry says in this was written in 1953, to Larry. He says to Larry, "Now I wish to propound an idea to you on which I should like your help and cooperation. I am now, I think, sufficiently well known," and he was well published by this time in the early 50s, "to attempt something which I've had in mind for a number of years. To you, no doubt, it will sound completely mad and a lot of rubbish. I want to start a trust or organization with land in somewhere like the West Indies for the breeding of those forms of animal life which are on the borders of extinction and which without help of this sort cannot survive. What I would like to know from you is, who do you know that is stinking rich?"
That's why he came to Jersey.
No, you're getting a little ahead of yours. He says, but listen to this here. "If I could find 3 or 4 people who'd be willing between them to put up £10,000, I could get the whole thing started."
Amazing. It is extraordinary. 1953, did you say?
Yeah.
So 72 years ago, he was still a young man. And conversations about conservation nature depletion. I mean, they were not widespread. It was not, and in any ways that wildlife was presented back to the world, whether it was filmically or in zoos, it was essentially a celebration of the glories of nature from around the world, and that we should all have an opportunity to take a look at it and be inspired. But there was very little being discussed about protecting it, or a sense that it was really in peril. Obviously, we had a few lessons that things could go wrong and animals could go extinct, hence the dodo being the symbol of the trust. But he was really ahead of his time in this thinking. And did you sense that was just the grit in the oyster for him, that he never let go, that you've got this amazing 4-word mission statement, which we heard earlier and is still central to everything that you do, saving species from extinction.
But you're right, this is something he never let go, but I think it's worth saying that in those early days he met talking about the influence of people on you, he met a man called Roger Payne, Professor Roger Payne, American, who was the big whale biologist. He discovered whale language, essentially. And he came to Jersey Zoo, and Jerry took him around, and Roger said at the end of the trip, he said, okay, I think I understand what you're on about. What you want to do is you are breeding them here so that you can put them back there if there is a there to put them back to. And Jerry, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. And that's why what we're talking about today, Rewild Our World, that's why that's so... It was the trajectory that Jerry was on.
So he could see into the future in a way that this issue of habitat loss, and therefore the urgency for habitat protection, or even habitat restoration, of course, which is in the rewilding, was going to be critical if we're going to make progress in saving species from extinction. But it's interesting that in the letter he mentions the West Indies, and yet we're here in Jersey. How did things come to happen here in Jersey?
Well, basically what happened was he finished his, when he decided he was going to use his animals from the last collecting trip, which was to British Cameroons. He settled his collection in his sister's garden in Bournemouth. Now, she was perfectly happy with that. The neighbors were not desperately happy. And he said, don't worry, just temporary thing. I'm going to be looking for a place around it. So he looked and he looked and he looked. And 2 years later, the neighbors were rolled up in arms, and he still hadn't found a place. But as I say, he was well published by then. It was his publisher. He said, oh, well, look, I've got a friend who lives down in Jersey in the Channel Islands. Have you ever thought of the Channel Islands? Your climate's a bit better. There's not as much bureaucracy as there is in England. That was true at the time. So Jerry and his first wife, Jackie, got on a plane summer of 1958 and flew down to Jersey, and they were met by Major Hugh Fraser, who took them around the island looking at properties. And they took him back to his house for lunch. And his house was Les O'Grey Manor in Trinity. And Jerry took one look at the manor house and the outbuildings, the beautiful rolling grounds, the water features. And he said, this would be a perfect place for my zoo.
But and his host was the owner of the house.
Yeah, oh yes.
Yes.
And Hugh said, well, actually, I'm thinking of downsizing and moving back to the UK. I will lease it to you. Wow. And he said, but wait a second, we better ask permission to do this. So Jerry got on the phone to the then, not sure it was not Minister of Tourism, but somebody in charge of tourism. And the man on the other end of the phone said, this is a great idea. We're just starting a little bit of tourism here in Jersey. We want people to come and have a good time. So yes, please go ahead and start your zoo. So within a few hours of arriving in Jersey, Jerry had accomplished what he couldn't do in England for 2 years.
Amazing. Obviously, Jerry's had extraordinary experiences all over the world and interacted with so many different animals that we could only ever dream of meeting. But I'm wondering, do you think sometimes a little favoritism or sentimentality creeps into the story? Are there particular creatures that fired him up and made him even more determined, or when things were not going well, he'd hear about something remarkable that he thought, well, I want to go and see what's happening to that. There's a kind of curiosity in the individual nature. The way he writes about animals, he's not averse to a little bit of anthropomorphism. They become wonderful characters in his book, so much so that many of them are given names. Chumley the chimpanzee, and there's
Sarah Huggersack.
Sarah Huggersack the anteater, yes, that's the one.
But I think that's an important aspect of Jerry's work. People have accused him of being anthropomorphic, but it is that way. He's really not sentimental if you really read it, but he brings the animal into your life and into your emotions, and that's where I think this whole business, what's now called nature connection, really resonates in Jerry's work. And I think that's a really important aspect of it here.
Well, I would like to read a piece about one of the animals that is famously thriving at the Jersey Zoo, that when he first encountered it, even after encountering so many other extraordinary animal characters around the world, it seemed to strike a chord with him that runs very deep, which was perhaps at the heart of my question. So I'm not going to tell you what it is, but some of you will know as I read, and it will become clear. In the gloom, it came along the branches towards me, its round, hypnotic eyes blazing, its spoon-like ears turning to and fro, independently like radar dishes, its black hands with their thin, attenuated fingers, the third seeming prodigiously elongated, tapping delicately on the branches as it moved along, like those of a pianist playing a complicated piece by Chopin. It looked like a Walt Disney's Witch's Black Cat with a touch of E.T. thrown in for good measure. If ever a flying saucer came from Mars, you felt that this is what would emerge from it. It was Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky come to life, whiffling through its tulgey wood. It lowered itself onto my shoulder, gazed into my face with its huge hypnotic eyes, and ran slender fingers through my beard and hair as gently as any barber. Then, to my alarm, it discovered my ear. Here, it seemed to say to itself, must lurk a beetle larvae of royal proportions and the utmost succulence. So if you want to find out what happened to Jerry's ear, at the hands of what many of you will now have recognized as the extraordinary eye, well, then you'll have to get a copy of this book. Tell us just a little bit about the eye and how it's come to be held in such extraordinary affection and importance here at Jersey Zoo.
It's first of all, I think it had been known in the UK, but hadn't done well at all, hadn't bred. And we had heard this was just prior to Jerry's last expedition, which was to Madagascar in 1990. And it had been believed to be extinct on the mainland in Madagascar and had been sort of marooned on an island by a French researcher. But we'd heard tell of a small population on the mainland and believed that it would be very helpful for the species for it to come to Jersey Zoo for breeding. So Jerry determined to that's why we were on that expedition. We were looking for other things as well. And it's an extraordinary creature, the eye. It used to be, Linnaeus classified it among the rodents, not among the primates, like what a lemur is, because of its long chisel-like teeth.
It's not an actual lemur, but it's kind of related to
no,
it is a lemur. It's the smallest of the lemurs, is it?
No, it's one of the biggest of the lemurs. Yes, where were you?
Yes.
It's big. It's very sort of fluffy, so maybe... anyway, they are extraordinary creatures.
Thank you for throwing me that bone.
Yes,
It's so fluffy, but underneath the fluff, it's really quite small.
Yes.
Okay, glad we've got that clear. Look, I'm actually on that note going to move on to a different subject altogether, which is food.
Really?
Well, yes, I think so, because it's just obviously it's something that's quite important to me in life. no doubt to many of us here, all of us in one way or another. But you were actually kind enough to send me a very lovely poem, and I was going to take the liberty, if I may, in a minute, of reading a few verses of it. But what it made it very clear to me was that, like many adventurers, Jerry actually did love the good things in life. He didn't mind a bit of comfort, perhaps as a contrast to the habitual discomfort that he must have experienced on so many of his expeditions. And in particular, he loved good food and wine. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from this poem that he sent to his agent Felicity. And he was in France, and at that point he was recovering from a minor heart attack. But it doesn't seem to have dulled his appetites and enthusiasm for good living in the French style. And this is just a little bit of this lovely poem. What to say of La Belle France, where arteries never have a chance, where every menu points with glee the way to adiposity. With all that wine and crispy bread, one more coronary, I'm dead. Mushrooms big as white umbrellas, they're minus calories, they tell us. But simmered slow in wine and cream, dieter's nightmare, glutton's dream. Roasted truffles are the best. What's that hammering in my chest? Shall I speak of hen or duckling, quails and pigeons, pigs still suckling? They say these things make you obese, like livers from whole flocks of geese, moving like huge drifts of snow. Just one more coronary to go. Oh, how the veggies make you tremble when in markets they assemble. Crisp green lettuce, dark green bean, shiny eggplant, quite obscene, cooked in wine and oil and butter. My heart then gave a tiny flutter. So he's obviously thank you. Thank you. Obviously enjoying his recuperation, perhaps more than he should have been, but it did make me wonder, and I'm sorry to spring this on you, but it made me wonder, obviously he loved good food and wine. Was he a cook? Did he enjoy cooking?
Yes, very much so, very much so. He learned cooking at his mother's knee in India, and he could cook. He cooked the most amazing curries, as you can imagine, that he'd learned from his mother. But we had a little house in France for a time, and that's where he'd go down to write. But he'd write, get up early in the morning, write till about 11, and then we'd go to the market, beautiful markets this was in Nîmes in the south of France. And he'd buy whatever we were having for supper or a big party, like nothing better than to give big parties and to do the cooking.
Wow.
Yeah, never did the cleaning up, mind you.
Gosh.
But yeah, he loved cooking too, and there was lots of butter and cream and such.
I can relate to that, and I think certain other members of my family can relate to the bit about the not clearing up as well. Well, that's nice to hear, very nice to hear. Jerry's books, as we've been saying, they've inspired so many people, and they still will inspire anyone who picks them up and reads them. But the world is a little different now from when I grew up, and many of us grew up loving these books and being touched by them and feeling that we wanted to play a part in his vision in any way we could of protecting the natural world. And I wonder what you think the challenges are for inspiring the next generation. It was particularly wonderful to see today some school kids, and when I say kids, I'm talking 3-year-olds, about 8 of them, being rolled into the zoo on a little trolley with their high-vis jackets on not the nicest day of the year, but they were clearly about to have an extraordinary and an inspiring experience, which is clearly something that every conservation-minded zoo should be engaging in, and you obviously do it brilliantly here. But one can't help sensing that for kids just a little bit older than that in the digital age with their phones and their screens, it's hard to capture and transmit and inspire these messages, both of the seriousness of what the nature is facing, but also the hope that organizations like Durrell's can offer for the next generation.
I think of we'll hear a little bit about that in a minute, because I think the way that you capture people's imagination, and you have done throughout the eons of human beings, is through storytelling. And we have so many amazing stories to tell. And whether those stories are told on film or by people speaking or in books, it almost doesn't matter as long as you keep telling the story and getting people inspired by that.
I mean, it was particularly, I know it was made a few years back when you launched the new vision, which we'll talk about in just a moment, when you added the idea of rewilding and restated your purpose in a sense for the next set of challenges ahead. It was extraordinary to see those amazing kids delivering that beautiful poem with such wonderful visual rich images as well, and I'm sure that's something that's probably got a few thousand views, if not many more, on YouTube. Yes, I mean, it's also important to talk about the results and the positivity of your work, which I know we're going to hear a lot about shortly. But another thing that's changed a little bit recently is that some of the nature work that the Durrell Trust has come home to the UK, and now you're working in Scotland. Is that an important thing now to be seen? There's a lot of conversation about the UK being one of the most nature depleted countries. When these things get measured and listed, we never seem to look like we're doing very well at all. Hopefully that's going to change, and hopefully the work that you're doing in Scotland will be part of that. What do you think Jerry would think about that? Was it ever on his agenda to set up programs for nature restoration in the UK?
Jerry certainly believed that unless you looked after your own back garden, you couldn't be preaching to people elsewhere in the world. And so, although when he was alive we didn't do things in the UK, I think where we are in Scotland now, and several other projects in the UK, that way he would have been on that trajectory towards that. I think the whole rewild our world thing, he never talked about rewilding. It wasn't even a popular word back then, but it was more ecological restoration. And we started doing restoration work back in the 80s with the little place Becky mentioned called Round Island. And that was something very, very important to Jerry. It was to restore the sort of set of all the species that worked together and had made the ecosystem function, made the whole thing tick. And that's what he saw and wanted to. So I think he would have been very, very chuffed to see the work in Scotland. He loves Scotland, by the way, and I filmed up there a lot in the book we wrote called Amateur Naturalist. And he would have been keen for us to be there.
It's an economical word, rewilding. It's a buzz phrase, but I think it's here to stay, and I think it is useful, and it encapsulates in just that short word what you referred to one of his supporters saying if they're still there, if this habitat is there, part of the equation, which he saw so early on and is now perhaps really at the center of the conversation about even about saving endangered saving species from extinction. It isn't going to happen unless the habitat is there. And rewilding reminds us that so much of the world was wild and has the potential to be wild again. And I often think in this context, particularly of the oceans, which are in a state of depletion and heavily overfished. But the oceans have an extraordinary regenerative power. In their case, without a lot of assistance other than being left alone. So the existing features of the ocean can replenish themselves, not necessarily exactly as they were before, but with a rich set of species ready to make a living there if we're not constantly pounding at them and hammering them and dragging up their habitats from the bottom of the sea as we attempt to put them on their plates. The nurturing of land requires perhaps a little bit more management and intervention.
Yeah, a little bit
purposeful.
More. Yeah.
But essentially, a lot of rewilding is about letting the land self-will again, which seems to be very productive in places like Knepp, which I'm sure many people here have heard about. And this is at the heart of the Scottish plan.
We're certainly helping things along by trying to, say, rehydrate the peat by keeping the deer numbers low so we don't get overgrazing, probably taking out monoculture forestry and letting the native forest regenerate. I mean, the biodiversity of Scotland in that area is so depleted that, you know, almost anything comes back, it's going to be a good thing. And I was up there in May with some of our trustees, and it's just a fantastic place, amazing place, and already starting to come back in bits with the little work that we've done there so far. So, you know, we've got a lease on the land for 100 years, and I'm absolutely positive we're going to see something amazing within the next 20.
Well, that's a very exciting prospect. And you'll all be appalled to hear that we are coming close to the end of our allotted time, but we're not quite there yet. And you've just looked 100 years into the future there in the context of the work in Scotland. But I wonder if we could just close with a few thoughts, both what you might imagine Jerry might think, but also what you think, Lee. Was Jerry able to the end to remain optimistic about the mission to save species from extinction, and taking up the cause as you have in such an extraordinary way and looking to the future, as you say, to the next 100 years? Are you able to find optimism too?
He often said, well, if I weren't optimistic or if I didn't have hope, you know, where I'd be now would be on a desert island drinking myself to death. But he wasn't. He was here, you know, in Jersey, in Madagascar, wherever we went. And I think, and I mean, I'm also pessimistic, but I'm also optimistic. You know, you can't, if you're totally pessimistic, you've lost the game, haven't you? Entirely. So you've got to have some hope. And what I was going to do here is to read one of my favorite poems that he wrote, which states that.
That might be a lovely thing for us to end on. And just before you do that, what I would like to say is how much hope and optimism I got from meeting the incredible team at the Jersey Zoo today and being shown around. Amazing, quite young relative to some of us still, and just so knowledgeable and always seeing the bigger picture as they go around feeding the birds and showing us the amazing otters and the wonderful reptile and amphibian house that I'm always an absolute sucker for, always thinking about the bigger picture and the story on the other side of the world and the work that they're doing that enables their teammates, which is essentially what they are in other parts of the world, to give us all hope that we are not just saving these species, but restoring and enriching habitats that can continue to thrive for many years to come. We'd love to hear the poem.
Yeah. So this was the end of a letter, actually, that Jerry put in a time capsule that was dropped into the foundations of a building in Jersey Zoo in 1988 by the Princess Royal. The building now being called the Princess Royal Pavilion. And this is what it said. We hope that there will be fireflies and glowworms at night to guide you, and butterflies in hedges and forests to greet you. We hope that your dawns will have an orchestra of birdsong, and that the sound of their wings and the opalescence of their coloring will dazzle you. We hope that there will still be the extraordinary varieties of creatures sharing the land of the planet with you to enchant you and enrich your lives as they have done for us. We hope that you will be grateful for having been born into such a magical world.
Lee, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us. We were on a hopeless mission this evening to try and encapsulate the incredible work of Gerald Durrell, the amazing vision that the zoo still has, and your extraordinary contribution to keeping that thread of hope alive for all of us. But I do want to take this opportunity of thanking everybody who came to see us here this evening for their continued support of this amazing venture. And very shortly, we're going to hear a little bit more about just what is happening all around the world, putting some real numbers and hard facts on the hopes and visions and ideals that Gerald Durrell instilled in all of us and that you keep blazing so brightly today. One more time, please, everybody. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you.
thank you, Lee and Hugh, for the really engaging, inspiring and optimistic conversation. I think we all truly, truly enjoyed that. So thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker for this evening, Dr. Mike Hudson. Mike began his journey with Durrell as a student, working on projects in the Caribbean and Madagascar, and even trained at our very own academy. He went on to complete his PhD with Durrell and the Zoological Society of London, focusing on the mountain chicken frog recovery program in the Caribbean, before joining Durrell as a conservation scientist. Over the past decade, he has progressed through roles including Conservation Science Manager, and in 2023 became our Director of Conservation Knowledge, leading our global teams in conservation science, training, and impact. During his time with us, Mike has worked alongside our incredible field staff, almost at all of our sites around the world, co-developing science and training programs with local partners and leading academics. His work ensures our conservation decisions are grounded in robust evidence, keeping Durrell at the forefront of science and impact in conservation. So no pressure, Mike. You know, you've got quite a big job there. This evening, Mike is going to share with us how we have fared against the ambitious goals we set ourselves in our 2017 Rewild Our World strategy. As well as the headlines, he'll bring to life some stories of change, showing the meaningful difference Durrell has made to species, ecosystems, and people. Please welcome Mike to the stage.
Great, thank you very much, Becky. I have not got my notes on the screen, which is going to put me off, so I'm going to give them 2 seconds to rearrange that. I'm here tonight to be a storyteller, really. I'm here to tell the stories on behalf of my colleagues who can't be here to tell them themselves. They're all amazing. I've spent lots of time, as Becky said, in the field with almost every one of our sites, with the staff, with the species we work on, and I genuinely feel really honoured to have the opportunity to tell their stories tonight, and of course take all the glory on my own. Tonight's story starts 8 years ago, in 2017, when we launched our Rewild Our World strategy. As everyone said, it marked a bit of a transition for Durrell, recognising we weren't just a species-focused conservation organisation, but we needed to make central to what we did to save and restore the ecosystems in which they lived. To make sure we delivered on this strategy, we set ourselves 4 ambitious goals. 4 goals that, if achieved, would create real impact. Those goals were 10 ecosystems being rewilded, 500 projects working more effectively, 1 million people better connected to nature, and 100 species on the road to recovery. Tonight I'm going to show you the difference that Durrell's made through those goals, but more importantly, tell you the story of how we achieved them. So the first goal, 10 ecosystems across the world's major biomes being rewilded. Here you can see our 14 sites across 10 ecosystems spread across the globe. Across all of them, we're delivering rewilding type actions in the bottom left-hand side of the screen there. Those rewilding type actions are those that enhance or return missing functions to an ecosystem to improve its resilience. We don't focus on restoring to a previous state, but creating something new that's resilient to the future change. In those sites that have been running since the beginning of our strategy, we've seen an increase in ecosystem integrity. That was a metric we created and had peer-reviewed to measure rewilding progress across all of our biomes. That's genuine, quantifiable difference in resilience and wildness across these ecosystems, thanks to the actions that Durrell took. So I think we can say we've accomplished that. But these are just numbers. I want to bring it to life. I told you I was going to tell some stories, and so I'm going to start. The first story of the night starts where we started the presentation which launched this strategy in 2017. In India, birthplace of Gerald Durrell, and home to the smallest and rarest pig, the pygmy hog. In 2017, we set out to change the way we did things in Assam, maintaining our fabulous breeding release program for the pygmy hog, the incredible pygmy hog, while scaling our operations to tackle the threats facing its entire home, the Terai grasslands in the sub-Himalayas. Now, I also promised to tell you the stories of our staff, the staff who did this work that I'm going to claim the credit for. On the left, Parag Decker, Dr. Parag Decker, and on the right, Dr. Dristaman Das, director of our program in India and lead scientist on that program, respectively. I've spent a lot of time in India with these two, and I can tell you they work incredibly hard. There is why spend 2 days going to 2 different sites if you can do it in one, and then go to another on the second day. They're incredible, and they still have the energy for a game of carom in the evening with their staff. Parag has worked in India for Durrell for decades. He's an incredible inspiration to all of us, and he's single-mindedly restoring an entire species and ecosystem. And here, another member of the Durrell family, Parag, was lucky enough to meet our royal patron when she visited India. During this strategy, we've cleared hundreds of hectares of invasive species, which render the grasslands otherwise unusable to pygmy hogs. From the scrubby, scratchy chromalina to the rapidly spreading and imposing silk cotton tree. We've delivered fire management research that's visible from space, and added new fire regimes to the all-important tiger management plans for the national park. All of this work is making space for pygmy hogs, including the release of 179 pygmy hogs at 2 sites from the 287 pygmy hogs born in 75 litters during this strategy. But it's not just making space for pygmy hogs. Our work on this species has driven the restoration of grasslands that are home to globally endangered Indian pangolins. The endangered hispid hare, also endemic to these same grasslands. The critically endangered Bengal florican and tigers. This shows the power of Rewild Our World, of using a single species to drive whole ecosystem restoration, and thanks to our astounding team in Assam. Our second story is much closer to home. In 2023, we took on our biggest challenge yet, rewilding 7,500 hectares of the Cairngorms National Park. The challenge is clear: to change that estate back from a sporting estate to one that puts nature and people first. Gone would be overgrazed heaths, commercial forests of invasive trees, and rapidly degrading peat bogs releasing thousands of tons of greenhouse gases. In its place, restored peatlands, expanding native forests, and healthy montane ecosystems, all thrumming with biodiversity. Birds, mammals, insects, frogs, reptiles, fish in numbers not seen in hundreds of years. The numbers on the screen there are those at the end of 2024 that we'd recorded, so there's still another year's data to go, but I'm really hopeful over the next 100 years we'll be able to come back and show you those numbers increasing as we go about our work. As I said, this marked a real step change for Durrell, suddenly becoming responsible solely for a site this large. That's a huge potential, it's also hugely intimidating. There are times when you stand on that estate and everything you can see we're responsible for. Despite that challenge, we're already making significant progress. And that's thanks to another amazing team. On the left, Kevin Simpson, our head keeper, who's worked on the estate for 39 years. He's brought all of his knowledge to support our endeavours. He's been an incredible help and support to our project. And on the right, Sam Buckland, our restoration manager, an unstoppable force in the field. I'm not exaggerating. Those of you who know Sam will know the man never stops. He's walked hundreds and hundreds of kilometres of transects across our estate to come up with a baseline for the biodiversity across the whole thing. They both do it also with a great sense of humour, which makes them great fun to work with. So if you ever get a chance to visit our estate, I highly recommend it. I said we'd already started making progress, and I can prove it. We've already started restoring 130 hectares of peat, despite this project only starting 2 years ago. 130 hectares of peat, when restored, will prevent the emission of 12,000 tonnes of greenhouse gases over 70 years. But we have greater plans to restore peat that will prevent the release of 300,000 tonnes of greenhouse gases. We also began to see the benefits of our renewed deer management regime. Rather than overgrazing, we've started to see 15,000 tree saplings come out of the ground. But what does that mean? I'd like to bring that data to life for you slightly with this slightly psychedelic graph of the habitat types at Donacardic. In purple, heather; in brown, bog; yellow, grassland; and a tiny vestigial amount of trees down in the right-hand side there, most of which are non-native. This is our dream map for forest. That's over 800 hectares of woodland across the estate in the next 100 years. A forest corridor connecting the north and south, the Great Spey and Tay catchments of Scotland. A corridor through which beavers, wildcats, maybe capercaillie, and hopefully one day lynx and wolves will roam. But what does 4,700 saplings look like? So I'm zooming in here to the Edendon Glen, this river that runs north to south from the estate. It's the only place we've surveyed for trees so far. The entire Glengarry along the south we haven't yet. So I've retained the dream map in green so you can see what we're aiming for. And this is the trees we're already seeing regrow thanks to our deer management. I'm only showing here tiles which have 400 stems per hectare, a density at which you can start to claim money from Scottish Forestry for protection of woodland. Don't take it just from me. Kevin, we have a quote from Kevin that after 39 years on the estate, this is the biggest change he's ever seen, with rowan, birch and aspen coming up all over lower elevations. He also very candidly said that he'd started noticing more nature at his own feet. And finally, I want to give a quick nod to Brazil. Thanks to Rewild Carbon, an initiative born out of this strategy, we've planted over 400,000 trees, over 200 hectares of forest. That's helping to create a network of corridors, you can see one here, connecting vestigial fragments of now incredibly rare Brazilian Atlantic rainforest. Meanwhile, back at the zoo, we conducted research that allowed us to design nest boxes that we transferred to the field to allow black lion tamarins to start using these corridors long before they would naturally, as they rely on tree holes in mature trees for safety. So achieved goal 1, we'll move on to goal 2. 500 endangered species projects working more effectively. In 2024, we celebrated 40 years of the Durrell Conservation Academy. As mentioned, I was a student there as well. I'm one of those numbers. So we've trained over 7,000 students from 153 countries during our time at the academy. And again, I want to introduce the team that do this work. Martine Godet in the top left, head of our Mauritius training program. Hantra Andriantonine in the top right, part of our new Madagascar training, runs that program. And Dr. Alex Thomas in the bottom left, who recently took over managing this team. They are genuinely amazing, passionate advocates of learning. Forget those who can't teach, these guys can. Martine was an incredible island restoration conservationist for years before she became a trainer. Hantra worked in climate change for years in policy. And Alex did research during her PhD to create new tools for forensics to track illegal wildlife trade, working with the Met Police. Together with their teams, they're continuing Jerry's desire to create an army of conservationists around the world. I mentioned that we trained 7,000 students over 153 countries in the last 40 years, but what about this strategy? So just within this strategy, so you can understand the scale that we're working at the moment, we trained 1,237 conservation practitioners, 1,368 aspiring conservationists over 101 countries. The scale of this operation is amazing. But did we reach the goal of 500 endangered species projects working more effectively? To answer this question, we carried out a series of pre- and post-training questionnaires to understand the changes in trainee competence before and after our training. These questionnaires revealed the importance of soft skills, facilitation, planning, leadership in making a difference. They also showed the importance of longevity of training. The longer courses were more impactful. So to come up with this number, 605, we counted only those students who had attended a course that was at least a week long, although in most cases 3 to 6 months, and included these impactful soft skills courses. 605, absolutely smashed it, accomplished. I was supposed to tell a story of a single alumni today who'd gone on to achieve something amazing, but it's too difficult to choose. So I'm going to bring Parag back into the story. He was a Desmond graduate, our flagship training course many years ago, and I've told you already about the amazing work he's doing, so I'm putting him in there. But I thought I'd tell you instead what it's like to have trained that many students in that time. And that is that every trip I've been on, I've traveled quite a lot with Durrell, in the last 3 years, I've bumped into someone who's been a Durrell graduate. Ty Nugent in the top left there, founder of Saving Vietnam's Wildlife, Carl and I met at a prize giving in Indianapolis. Devon Carter in the bottom left there, a 2022 Desmond graduate, was presenting case studies at a workshop in the Caribbean attended by our staff just last month. And the video on the right-hand side there that I played was in a very, very remote part of northern Madagascar I was last year in a story I'll tell you a bit later on. And we bumped into, in the middle of nowhere, a guy called Serafan, who I'd spoken to and, trained about 6 months before, in the middle of nowhere. This place is amazing and conservationists are amazing. So the third goal, 1 million people better connected to nature. A study out this week revealed that the UK is 5th bottom in the global rankings of nature connection. That means we see each other as completely separate from nature, no responsibility for it. On the other side of the spectrum, Nepal, people were extremely connected to nature. They felt part of nature. It was intrinsically in them. So as part of the strategy here, we aim to better connect 1 million people, improving both their well-being, their sense of responsibility for nature, but also the likelihood of taking nature-positive actions, all of which are things that happen when your nature connection is higher. People connect with nature through 5 pathways: sensory contact, appreciation of beauty, finding meaning in nature, emotional connection, and showing compassion. We use the range of approaches to encourage nature connection, but it's really hard to measure changes in nature connection. The only validated measure for nature connection was made for wealthy countries, and we interact with nature in a very different way to those in poorer nations. In fact, our own research in Madagascar revealed there is no word for nature. Even the concept of nature doesn't exist. Trees and rocks are in the same category, living warm-blooded animals in another. You can't measure nature connection in the same way. So we've started doing research to understand that. Because we can't measure nature connection, we instead counted those people who've been exposed to a nature connection intervention which engaged one of those 5 pathways I described before. And that total was 912,000 people. So not quite the million, but 90% of the way there, and I would give us a gold star. In fact, the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquaria did exactly that. They gave us 3 awards for nature connection interventions that we delivered during this strategy. I want to bring some of those interventions to life really quickly. Hopefully lots of you saw our sculpture trails in Jersey. Well, you've actually all been subjected to a nature connection intervention. We're lucky in Jersey we have wild places on our doorstep, but we don't always appreciate them. The gorilla and tortoise trail was aimed to do exactly that, to engage people, to get them outside in nature and appreciate the beauty of it. Appreciating the art on the gorillas and the nature around them is a surefire way to improve nature connection. People walked over 104,000 miles, that's 17 miles per app user, whilst these trails were running. That's a hell of a lot of time outside compared to none. And at the zoo, we created our first explicit nature connection exhibit, the butterfly kaleidoscope, with the intention of encouraging people to engage with the nature in that exhibit through beauty, stopping and appreciating what's around them. We, as a staff group many years ago, did hot yoga in the butterfly house. And let me tell you, it is impossible not to be connected with nature when doing the downward dog with a butterfly on your nose. So, goal 4, 100 species on the road to recovery. 2.9 out of 3 so far, so no pressure. To measure the progress towards this goal, we describe 3 main mechanisms through which we help to recover species. Restoring directly through captive breeding and translocations, supporting other programs through training, scientific support, and enabling others through partnerships and research. We only counted species for which we'd made a significant contribution through one of these 3 pathways. By significant, I mean staff on the ground, staff time on the projects, big financial investments. We helped, in total, bring 116 species on the road to recovery. Accomplished. But how do we know we're recovering these species while we work on them? I've just said we've worked on them. During this strategy, we worked with a consortium of international conservation organisations to create a new international standard which quantifies the impact of conservation on species recovery. It's called the green status of species. To find out whether we've made a difference, we have to ask 6 questions. The first, what was the state of these species? How well recovered were they when we started in conservation? Durrell started working around 1970, and so we start our graph at that point. Question 2, how close are these species to being fully recovered now? What change has happened since that baseline when we started working on them? Thankfully, it's increasing. I was glad to see that. Possibly not, though, as steep as you might have been expecting. And this is a great time to say that species recovery is a different game to preventing extinctions. Preventing extinctions is easy. Recovering species is not. You have to tackle a multitude of interacting threats to allow a species to recover. You're mitigating everything that's affecting that species. But still, we're moving in the right direction. Great news. But that's not the whole story either. The species wouldn't have stayed static at that level, that status, were we not for working on them. They would have collapsed. And that is the difference that Durrell has made so far. We're restoring species against the tide of those species moving towards extinction. But what about the future? What can we realistically achieve in the next 10 years? And we can plot that on this graph. Another increase, that's really positive. We're an optimistic organisation. What would happen if we gave up? This is conservation dependence. These species are dependent on our continued work and the reason we, as Durrell, cannot give up. And finally, because we conservationists are optimists, we can ask the final question. What could we achieve in 100 years? What's the maximum level of restoration for these species? That's where we need to be aiming. We've always thought long term, but Durrell's quite unique in that vision. And through the green status, we've brought a lot of other organisations along on that journey. We know it takes on average 17 years to move a species, one category in the red list, away from extinction. 17 years. Genuine species recovery is measured in decades, not years. Now, I'd like to bring these numbers to life again. What does species conservation really look like? And I have the pleasure of introducing a film we produced of amazing events which followed the Boccaccio oil spill in Mauritius, as told by two of our longest serving staff members at Durrell, one of who's in the front row. Dr. Nick Cole, Mauritius Programme Director, and Matt Goetz, Curator of Herpetology and our current Interim Zoological Director, both 20 years or more at Durrell, incredibly long serving staff members. I'd also like to thank the Jean Boulle Group for helping us make this film.
Mission accomplished, I think, is the word that went through our mind at that moment.
That was a huge celebration for our family because just to see the whole process go full circle.
This was an incredible joint effort between the field and zoo teams at Durrell.
Being able to actually do this together with the team in Mauritius was incredible. We were very relieved, very happy, and we felt it was a success.
Five years ago, we rescued threatened reptiles from the southeast islets. This was in response to the Boccaccio oil spill that was polluting their habitats. We knew at the time this oil spill would have an impact, and as it turns out, our actions have been absolutely critical to the future survival of the lesser night gecko on these islets. I will never forget that moment, seeing this ship stuck on the reef just shortly after it had run aground. It started pouring 1,000 tons of oil into the ocean, and I knew we were facing one of our worst environmental disasters. I also knew we needed to act fast, as these islets are home to the lesser night gecko and the Bossier skink, which were found on just a handful of offshore islets off the coast of Mauritius. And I was not about to see them disappear as a result of this disaster. Durrell had been operating in Mauritius for the past 50 years on a number of environmental and conservation projects. At the moment of the oil spill, our mission was to save an important part of the Mauritian ecosystem. And together with our partners, we rescued 66 reptiles.
You can see the females are so much smaller.
I converted half of my house to be able to look after these reptiles securely, but also to be able to feed them. But I knew that this was a temporary solution, and I desperately needed to get them to long-term specialist care. The problem was we were in the midst of a pandemic. All flights were grounded, and I knew that this was going to be really tough to move these animals out of the country. However, with the support of our Mauritian partners and contacts that I have within Mauritius, I hatched a plan to get them to Jersey Zoo.
We thought, because I have such a love for animals and involved in conservation, that we needed to do this, especially for Mauritius. It was a 12-hour flight, and every 10-15 minutes we were looking at the gauge on the temperature. Too much, too little. I mean, it was a lot of pressure.
We were just so relieved, and remember being delighted that the creatures were in the right hands, in the internationally renowned hands of Durrell, and hope that the project would go forward.
They all survived the journey. They all survived afterwards, and we bred immediately a number of copies to safeguard all those genetic varieties. And then over the years, we bred more numbers, especially then gearing up to earlier this year, where we needed a large number of eggs for the first release, and then especially also for higher numbers of eggs being released annually back to Mauritius. Among the many collaborators making this whole project possible is Cardiff University, and their expertise in providing us with the genetic analysis of the samples we took before and after the oil spill really laid the foundation and was instrumental getting our plan together in repatriating eggs to Mauritius. Normally when I travel to our field sites, the plane journey itself is more of a kind of downtime, of course. You watch your movie, you read your book, you sleep. Having, you know, those precious eggs, the combination of work of 5 years next to me on the seat, it was a very, very different story and a very, very different plane journey. Then back here in Jersey, we sat with bated breath to hear from Nick's team whether the eggs have hatched and how many. And the team in Mauritius went back and checked the eggs on a regular basis. And in the end, once they all have hatched, we have found that the hatch rate was 88%, which is incredibly good in a wild setting. It's only shy of what we achieve here in controlled settings in Jersey. So our plan worked to perfection.
We will keep monitoring these populations, learning from what we find so we can adapt to what we're understanding. This is how we deliver lasting change. We've proven what is possible with commitment, science, and bold action.
It wouldn't be possible without Durrell's ability to react at such short notice and then to follow through medium to long term and to continue to follow through. And the multitudes of scientists and teams involved internationally to make things like this happen. So it really is a case study in what is possible and what can be done.
To me, this is the perfect Durrell project, where everything comes together, decades worth of field work, of data collection, of science, having the confidence and the knowledge to pull that through in a captive setting, and then moving them back. If in a few years we see those genes integrate in the natural population, then this would have been the perfect project. And it's really the project that makes me and my team looking after the animals the most proud.
An amazing story. But we're not short on stories, so I'm going to move on to another one. That of the Madagascar pochard, once the rarest duck on Earth. I'm going to start this story once again by introducing the team. Felix Rezafindrajau and Jocelyn Raffel. Felix has worked for us for decades. I actually don't know how long, but it's longer than most of us. And Jocelyn started when we started carrying out reintroductions of this species, but they are both, again, amazing servants of Durrell. So I'm going to try and paraphrase the history of this project up to the start of this strategy so we can focus on what's happened during the strategy. And so this story starts with this bird, a photo taken by Lee Durrell in Antananarivo in 1994. This bird was believed to be the last Madagascar pochard on Earth. Despite huge numbers of surveys across the highland lakes of Madagascar in which this bird is found, the species was declared extinct in 2004. However, there is a twist in the tale already. This bird was then rediscovered in 2006 on this tiny volcanic crater lake, Matsuboimena, in the north of Madagascar. You can see Felix on the left there looking much younger than he did in the last photo. And also in the middle, Dr. Glyn Young, ex-curator of birds at Durrell, who was instrumental in this project and recently retired. As a result of finding this tiny population, just 25 animals, a real conservation emergency / celebration, a rescue mission was launched in 2009 to collect eggs from this tiny population alongside WWT, the Peregrine Fund and the government of Madagascar. This is our colleague Cassidy coolly collecting the eggs of the rarest duck on Earth, a job I would not have liked to have had, to take them to an incubator just before they hatch, to take them into captivity. Some of those eggs hatched on the lake shore, and some in the Land Rover on the way to the hotel we were using as a holding facility. In 2011, Lee officially opened our new captive breeding centre in Madagascar, and by 2018, we'd bred 100 captive ducks. I'm going to stop at this point to tell a small story about the genetics of this species because they're very interesting. Ducks, for those of you who know about them, are often fairly promiscuous. The females may well breed with more than one male, and so when you come into captivity, you would normally breed this nest with this nest to ensure there was no inbreeding. With ducks, it's a bit more difficult, so we did that, and then we started doing some conservation research with the University of Cardiff. We looked at these data, and it turned out every single clutch of eggs had full siblings and fully unrelated animals. How does that work? Not just half siblings, completely unrelated animals. The conservation geneticists we worked with at Cardiff then coined a term, reproductive anarchists. These birds, it seems, not only do the females mate with multiple males, they'll then go and lay their eggs in every nest possible, which makes it very difficult to prevent inbreeding until you've got the genetic data that we do. So following the successful breeding, we carried out this grueling and extensive search for suitable release sites in the most inaccessible parts of the highlands of Madagascar, until we settled on Lake Sophia on the right, here being surveyed by Jocelyn. We selected this site because of its emergent reed habitat, which is used for nesting by the pochards, the presence of other waterfowl, which meant there was food, and also the low pressure from fishers in the area, very little fishing on Lake Sophia. And then in 2018, just at the start of this strategy, we carried out our first releases of captive-born ducklings, with 21 released into these floating aviaries. These floating aviaries are quite amazing. This is a diving duck. The only bird that can access a floating aviary is a diving duck. So we can selectively feed our pochards with these feeding stations, provide them some shelter. So this is what the story looks like across this strategy up to 2023. So we carried out reintroductions of around 150 ducklings and had a stable population of around 70 or 80 by 2023. That's a remarkable recovery for a species that was known only of 25 individuals in a single crater lake just decades before. We then had wild ducklings in 2019, our reintroduced birds bred for the first time. And then dispersal. We had so many ducks, they started moving 300 kilometers south to an ancestral lake they would call home, called Lake Alotra, the biggest lake in Madagascar. But then it's conservation, there's always a twist in the tale, and disaster struck in 2024. In January 2024, torrential rains caused a catastrophic event. The catastrophic rain, alongside this inability of this watershed to hold water because of the deforestation in the surrounding areas, caused erosion, washing away the natural earth-marsh barrier holding this lake in place. Water rushed out through this small channel, which rapidly became over 30 meters wide. By June, this once narrow drainage channel had become a breach 120 metres wide. The 300-hectare surface area of Lac Sophia, within weeks, had shrunk by a staggering 90%. This is a photo I took around June 2024, at which point the lake had ended up almost a puddle. 1% of its original surface area and 40 centimetres deep at most. This also resulted in the drying up of all of the wells in the local communities. The watershed had dropped so far. People were having to walk miles for water. So when there, we decided we had to take immediate action. To retain what little water was left, create a small lake that we could keep these potsherds secure on before we could work out what to do with this drained lake. So we worked with the communities to create a 100-metre long dam made of sandbags and wood. The construction took about 3 weeks and was just an incredible effort by these local communities, the most resourceful nation on earth. Now there was enough water to move our supplementary feeding station, those floating aviaries, onto this lake to provide an anchor for those potsherds, to provide food and ensure they were safe while we found a solution. And this was the solution. We worked with local, national and international stakeholders to model hydrology, map topography, identify the best dam site and source local materials, rocks, etc. Equally importantly, we consulted with all of the local communities and stakeholders to ensure there was buy-in, ownership of this dam by local people. And the solution was this, a 140-metre wide, compacted stone and earth dam with a 20-metre wide concrete overflow channel and 2 auxiliary channels down the outside to ensure constant flow of water to the rice paddies of people below the dam. But we had to act fast. The wet season at this point was just weeks away and we had to build a dam. I am quite an optimistic person, but when I visited and this problem was in front of me, the time scale was in front of me, I didn't believe we could do it. But to my disbelief, and thanks not only to the funders of this work, but to our fundraising team and the amazing field program staff we have, we built a dam. Something, I said this earlier, in conservation, you're always surprised by the things you end up doing. You find a problem, you have to find a solution to it. And I would never have said I would have spent weeks on phone calls about the hydrology and functioning of dams. By February this year, the lake had returned to 90% coverage of its original surface area. It wasn't as deep as it was before, but the water was back. There you go, covering much of the area. And you can see around number 5, the drop that occurred in duck numbers following the breach of that dam, the breach of the natural dam. And then 6 and 7 are restoration of the dam and the watershed, and those duck numbers are starting to come back up. Almost 60 animals on a regular basis. It takes lots of people to save species from extinction. Everyone listed here. All of these jobs that we have at Durrell contribute in some way to our conservation work. But it also takes just one. I've mentioned several people in my presentation who've worked at Durrell for decades, and you might describe as being single-handedly responsible for these restorations as part of our team. There are individuals in this room, whether that be directly or indirectly through support, that could prevent extinctions of species and help us restore both entire species and ecosystems. That is the power of Durrell, and that is the power of one.
The power of one is all it takes. One touch to heal the harm. One spark to vanquish the darkness. One whisper to wake a dream. One cause to unite us all. All it takes are the ones who say no to extinction, who get up every day and check the traps, do the maths, question the facts, and map the ground. The ones who check the results, then check the results again, then do the science. The ones who face the problem, then decide what to do about it. The ones who shovel the crap, then sweep up what's left, who heal the cuts and bumps and bruises, then take the blisters, the bites and the fevers, because that's the job. The ones who get up before sunrise to suffer the setbacks and break through the breakthroughs. the ones who paddle, plant, watch, who track, monitor, count, lose count, then count again, who nurture, care and cradle the hopes of tomorrow, the ones who trek for hours into days, strive and drive onwards, searching the forests, jungles and swamps for a sign, then return empty-handed, to sit down somewhere, anywhere, to write a report, then before the day is done, walk into town to join the locals, to hear their troubles and help them find the answers. The ones who are willing to shoulder the responsibility of saving a species and carry that responsibility gladly until the job is done. The ones out there, day after day, no matter what, getting on with it. One person is all it takes. One person to fight one battle until it's won. One species to save 1,000. One love to last a lifetime. One life to make a difference. One day at a time. We are one.
And now, as we near the end of this wonderful evening, it gives me great pleasure to invite a key member of our Durrell family to say a few words. In 1972, Gerald Durrell personally invited Her Royal Highness to become patron of the Trust. And since then, Her Royal Highness has been a constant source of support, visiting Jersey regularly, engaging with our teams and animals here at the zoo, and also visiting field programs across Mauritius, Madagascar, India, and Brazil. Her unwavering dedication has inspired generations of Durrell staff and supporters and continues to embody the spirit and vision that Gerald Durrell set in motion over 6 decades ago. It is now my great pleasure to invite our patron, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, to say a few words.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Your Excellency and all those many people here who know so much about Durrell and what has been created here. And that's, of course, yes, the trustees, the staff, volunteers, friends of Durrell. And actually, people of Jersey had been pretty extensively supportive over the years. It's a real pleasure to join you. It does mark a bit the passage of time. And, you know, those dates... I'm getting to the stage I don't really need to hear that anymore. But it would be, I think, Lee may be able to, well, he wasn't around at the time, but I think Gerald was quite surprised when I turned up, having been asked to become patron. But nonetheless, he was extremely generous. And I've learned a lot, and I've hugely enjoyed it. Rather like you, I started my connection entirely through his books. And I don't know if you've ever done it, but actually reading a book on a train and bursting out laughing is not a way to make yourself popular. That was the kind of impact it had. And I've been so grateful for that connection, his acceptance of this slightly unlikely patron over the years, and the ability to be able to follow up some of his plans and for the future, and the way in which he worked. And that's been equally, from my perspective, to be able to follow through some of those projects, a very important part of the equation. What brought him to Jersey, it was patently a good time to come. He picked the moment and got on with it. What Jersey had offered him was exactly what was needed to create that kind of forward step for species that were under threat. And you have more than raised your game in terms of supporting the whole concept, which was slightly unusual at the time. But this Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust has brought together people across the world. And they share his belief, not just that every species matters and that conservation is about a moral responsibility, but you need to understand the world you live in and the world that they live in a bit more to be able to make it really work. And I suppose that's the thing that impressed me most about what Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust and Durrell's inspiration was his understanding of people and their relationship to the world in which they live, but also their dependency on it and how that changed their attitudes to those animals and places in which they lived. But he had this extraordinary way about him, and his adventurous spirit of getting to know, understanding cultures and lifestyles, arguably probably didn't do him, certainly not his liver, very much good. But it kind of convinced people who would otherwise have quite rightly assumed they were being preached at, that this was part of their life. It was part of what they needed to do as much as anybody else, and it would make a difference to their lives, looking after their own environment, looking after those a part of nature that is around them that would improve their lives in the long run. That was not a view that was probably widely accepted when Gerald founded this organisation in 1959. And bearing in mind that this is the centenary of his birth, that makes him not very old when he started this organisation, with a huge amount of enthusiasm and ambition, and a degree of confidence that many wouldn't have had at that stage in their careers. But my goodness, did he make an impact, because the evidence was there that supported what he was doing, and the success of the way in which they rescued these species and were able to replace them in habitats, understanding those habitats and how they could be protected. That is the logical step for where you've added to this, whether you call it rewilding, ecological restoration, sounds to me pretty good. Allowing you to know that there are places that you can replace those species which you are breeding very well and very successfully here to be able to be replaced. A real understanding that is way more than most organisations have. And the evidence that Durrell's work has saved countless of species is also here now. It takes a bit of time, I know, to provide that evidence. It was observational evidence which said it was making a difference, and now you have real evidence that it has made a difference. I hope that will hugely encourage the next stage of this as an organisation for the future. Those I myself have been fortunate to visit some of these places, to see the commitment of the teams on the ground and the understanding of the people that they brought along with them, gives you confidence that this is going to make a real difference in the long run, and the evidence will be there for the future. None of that would have been possible without the commitment of those who work here in Jersey, also in the field, and the teams that have been created by those individuals who've been able to train, but also instill that confidence and knowledge that they are going to make a difference, to the laboratories which back up so much of that knowledge, and the generosity of the supporters and volunteers. And some of those, I'm delighted to say, have really given a lifetime in a way of engaging the trust with people here in Jersey, but also on a much wider basis. And they continue to do that. The message that we can give today is one that I hope backs up what Joel Durrell himself considered really important when he set up the trust. And it's understanding that conservation is about people, that engagement, that relationship with people, and maintaining all of that work, and Durrell's real ambition to work with communities for the ecological restoration, for the maintenance and support of those species which have suffered, is certainly just as relevant today. And we look at habitat loss and know that we can, a bit of care, a bit of knowledge, and a bit of engagement with the communities, we can make a difference. We know we have a challenge from an ever-growing human population, and that we have to work harder at getting so much of that human population who hasn't been brought up in these, both in the environment in which these species live. They need to be connected more to understand more about how important the environments are, not just to those species, but to the rest of the human population on this planet. That balance of knowledge and understanding. So thank you for all your work here in Jersey and across the globe, because it demonstrates that hope is not misplaced. We know we can make a difference. That, as we think about 100 years that Durrell has been on the planet, has encouraged everybody, but it gives us a historical perspective too about the difference that can be made. This is all of the changes that you have been able to create and what we've seen over the years. Gerald Durrell, I don't imagine he was born thinking he was going to be a conservationist, but it didn't take him long to work that out. And celebrating his birth 100 years ago is entirely appropriate to give us both the historical perspective and the confidence of knowing what he had achieved in his lifetime and what he left as a real legacy for others to follow and to grow that legacy and to continue to make a difference. So we honour Gerald Durrell's memory, not only in celebrating his achievements, but by continuing that work with, I hope, the same energy and optimism that defined his life, although I hesitate to suggest you go for the cultural experience in quite the same way. That may not be necessary. But thank you all for making the difference, for being here tonight to help us celebrate, and to congratulate everybody who's been involved in what we now call the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust on its success, as we perhaps also celebrate the respect and responsibility that this organisation has developed and grown, and that has led to an extraordinary degree of trust in the work that it does. That's come from really hard work from everybody, so thank you.
Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for your kind words. Your steadfast support and loyalty for more than 50 years as our patron has been remarkable. And I speak for everyone at Durrell when I say how privileged we feel to have you as our patron. I'd now like to bring this evening to a close by thanking you all for coming and being a part of this evening. Please do continue to support Durrell and positively advocate for Durrell. We truly do appreciate your support. Please do remain seated while the Princess Royal and her guests depart this evening. And then I wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you and good night.